what if weakness isn't weakness at all, but the deadliest strategy of control ever invented? Machiavelli knew this truth, and it terrifies anyone who dares to see it. They tell you to never underestimate strength, but Machiavelli warned us about something far more dangerous, something most people never see until it's too late: the illusion of weakness. From the outside, it looks fragile, it looks harmless, it looks like someone too broken to ever cause real harm. But behind that mask, weakness can be a weapon sharper than any sword, capable of bending the strongest wills without raising a single hand. We are conditioned from childhood to protect weakness. When we see someone stumble, we rush to help. When we hear a trembling voice, we soften our tone. When we see tears, our defenses drop. This instinct is human, but it is also exploitable. Those who understand this know that they don't need armies or riches to control others. They only need to appear powerless. Machiavelli noticed this pattern centuries ago in courts and palaces, where the so-called powerless often steered the fate of nations. They did not lead with force, but with a subtler law, the art of bending strong men through the theater of fragility. History is filled with figures who pretended to be too weak to rule, only to end up commanding more power than the generals standing beside them. Consider the advisor who acts frail in body, but whispers carefully chosen words into the ear of a king. The ruler believes he is protecting his fragile servant, but slowly, decision after decision, it is the frail advisor who guides the kingdom's future. Machiavelli understood that strength often exposes itself, but weakness hides its claws until it is too late. The illusion of weakness thrives because strong people fear being seen as cruel. Say no to the weak, and you are branded heartless. Resist their pull, and you are accused of lacking compassion. So the strong comply, thinking they are protecting the helpless, never realizing they are being led. You've likely seen this in your own life. The colleague who constantly claims they can't handle their workload, yet somehow gets everyone else to pick up the slack. The family member who always plays the victim, drawing endless attention and energy from others while never taking responsibility. The partner who convinces you that their fragility makes them entitled to your constant sacrifice. These are not accidents. They are strategies, sometimes conscious, often unconscious, but always effective. And this is why Machiavelli called weakness a hidden weapon, because the illusion of weakness disarms you before you even recognize that you're in a battle. What makes this law so sinister is how natural it feels to comply. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like kindness, like duty, like doing the right thing. You don't realize you've been trapped until your energy is gone, your confidence eroded, and your choices no longer belong to you. The illusion of weakness has already won. Machiavelli warned that those who cannot wield swords learn to wield sympathy. And sympathy is often more dangerous than steel. A sword can only strike one person at a time, but guilt, pity, and obligation can chain entire groups of people to a single fragile figure. In the royal courts of Florence, it was not always the king who held power. It was often the widow who appeared powerless, or the quiet servant who acted overwhelmed, or the trembling counselor who claimed no strength of his own. By drawing compassion, they created invisible bonds of loyalty, stronger than oaths and bloodlines. The illusion of weakness persists today because society praises self-sacrifice. To resist the weak is to risk being labeled cold, selfish, or unkind. And so people submit to manipulation willingly, wearing their obedience as a badge of honor, never questioning who benefits from their endless generosity. This is why Machiavelli called weakness a law of control, because once you mistake it for innocence, you can no longer protect yourself from it. The first step to breaking free is to recognize that the helpless are not always helpless. Sometimes they are the hidden rulers of your life. Machiavelli is remembered as the thinker who stripped away illusions, who dared to describe human nature not as it should be, but as it truly is. He saw what others refused to admit, that people are often driven not by honor or kindness, but by fear, survival, and the hunger for influence. From this brutal honesty came what I call Machiavelli's dark law. Weakness, when disguised as innocence, becomes one of the most effective weapons of control. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it cries, sometimes it whispers from a place of apparent fragility. And those who fall for the act, who mistake fragility for virtue, end up bound by invisible chains. Machiavelli watched this dynamic play out in the Florence of his time. Soldiers fought in the streets, nobles competed for dominance, but it was often the apparently powerless who dictated outcomes. The widow, who appeared harmless, but knew how to summon sympathy to bend entire factions. The fragile counselor, who whispered advice no one dared ignore for fear of looking cruel. Even kings, with armies at their command, could not resist the pull of weakness once it had been weaponized. Machiavelli understood that humans are terrified of being seen as ruthless. We want to be admired for our generosity, our compassion, our humanity. And this weakness of conscience is precisely where manipulators strike. By presenting themselves as victims, they recruit your morality as their enforcer. They never need to demand your obedience. They only need to make you feel guilty for withholding it. Imagine someone who constantly complains about their suffering, their burdens, their inability to cope. At first, you help them out of kindness, but slowly, your help becomes expected. Their fragility turns into a silent command. If you ever hesitate to give, you are painted as cruel. You are no longer acting freely. You are acting out of fear of being judged. This is the essence of Machiavelli's dark law. The weak do not need to overpower the strong. They simply convince the strong to destroy themselves with guilt. What makes this law so unsettling is how universal it is. It can appear in families where one member constantly plays the victim to maintain control over everyone else. It can appear in workplaces where the least competent employee somehow dictates the pace by demanding constant rescue. It can appear in friendships where fragility becomes a leash disguised as closeness. And each time, the strong are disarmed because they fear being accused of cruelty. Machiavelli saw that this law thrives in silence. The weak never openly say, "Serve me." They only say, "Don't abandon me." They only sigh, only weep, only tremble. And in that trembling, the conscience of others betrays them. They hand over control willingly, never realizing that they are no longer protecting the weak. They are serving them. Machiavelli's brilliance was that he did not romanticize this pattern. He did not say it was good or bad, only that it was real. And those who ignored it would always fall victim to it. He wrote that men are not ruined by obvious enemies, but by the hidden influence of those they cannot refuse. The illusion of weakness takes root because it forces you into a dilemma. Do you protect yourself and risk being called cruel? Or do you give in and appear noble while secretly being controlled? Most people choose the second path because society rewards the appearance of kindness more than the reality of sovereignty. This is why the dark law survives across centuries, why it still rules households, offices, and nations today. Think of how often you have given your time, your money, or your energy, not because you wanted to, but because you feared the consequences of saying no. That moment was the dark law at work, turning your conscience into someone else's weapon. Machiavelli's warning is clear. If you do not learn to see through the mask of weakness, you will forever mistake chains for compassion and obedience for kindness. He taught that the strong must not be cruel, but they must be discerning, able to separate true need from strategic helplessness. Only then can you resist the pull of those who wield weakness like a blade. Only then can you live free from the quiet domination of those who control not with power, but with pity. The mask of helplessness is one of the most effective disguises of control ever created. Unlike open threats or loud demands, it operates in silence, wearing the face of innocence. Those who wield it rarely appear dangerous. They look fragile, burdened, or incapable of causing harm. But that is precisely what makes them powerful. When someone presents themselves as helpless, they disarm you before the struggle even begins. You do not see an opponent. You see a responsibility. And once you accept responsibility for them, you are no longer acting freely. You are already trapped in their orbit. Machiavelli understood that appearances rule the world more than reality. A strong man who looks threatening invites resistance. A weak figure who looks harmless invites loyalty. The mask of helplessness works because it flips your instincts against you. You are taught that to be noble is to protect the fragile, that to be moral is to care for the suffering. And so you take the bait, believing that you are acting out of compassion, when in truth, you are being recruited into a system of control. The tactics are subtle. Some display fragility in public, knowing that witnesses will rush to their defense. Some withhold responsibility, claiming they cannot handle tasks, forcing others to step in. Some drain attention by portraying themselves as too broken to be held accountable. Each method is different, but the outcome is the same. Others begin carrying weight that was never theirs to bear. Imagine a spouse who constantly insists they're too emotionally fragile to face conflict. Instead of addressing issues, they retreat into tears or silence, leaving their partner to bend, to soothe, to carry the full burden of the relationship. At first, it feels like kindness to adjust. Over time, it becomes obligation. Or consider the colleague who always says, "I can't do this alone," turning every project into a rescue mission. They may not openly demand help, but by constantly portraying themselves as helpless, they ensure that others sacrifice time and energy to cover for them. Slowly, the entire workplace bends to their pace. The most unsettling truth about the mask of helplessness is that it often doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like innocence. It feels like duty. And because it feels natural to protect, you never suspect that your compassion is being converted into chains. Machiavelli saw that true power often hides in plain sight, concealed not behind strength, but behind weakness, so convincing it becomes irresistible. The mask of helplessness is not always worn with full awareness. Some use it deliberately, crafting their image as fragile to gain control. Others slip into it unconsciously, repeating a strategy that worked in childhood, crying, withdrawing, or appearing incapable until someone else stepped in to solve the problem. But whether conscious or unconscious, the effect is the same. Those around them surrender strength, while the seemingly weak tighten their grip. Machiavelli recognized that this mask was most dangerous when combined with silence. Open complaints can be challenged, but silent suffering turns into an unspoken command. You feel pressure without anyone saying a word. The helpless partner who sighs at your independence, the colleague who looks crushed by every task, the friend who falls into despair whenever you assert boundaries. Each silently demands that you shrink so they can feel secure. Over time, this drains you more than any loud tyrant ever could. The mask of helplessness does not attack your body. It attacks your conscience until you mistake servitude for compassion. And this is the cruel genius of the law. By convincing you that your strength is dangerous and their weakness is sacred, they turn you into the enforcer of your own imprisonment. Once you recognize this mask, you begin to see it everywhere. In homes, in offices, in politics, even in yourself. The question then becomes, what happens when helplessness stops being a mask and becomes a weapon? When weakness is no longer just a disguise, but is sharpened into a weapon, it becomes one of the most terrifying strategies of control ever seen. Machiavelli warned that rulers fall not because of armies on the battlefield, but because of soft hands that guide them from behind the throne. To appear fragile is one thing. To deliberately wield fragility to bend others is something else entirely. Weakness as a weapon works because it does not look like an attack. It looks like need. It looks like dependence. It looks like a cry for protection. And this is why it strikes deeper than force ever could. Force awakens resistance. Weakness awakens guilt. When you feel guilty, you willingly hand over your freedom, and you do it while believing you are acting out of love. Imagine a monarch who feigns sickness to keep ambitious nobles at bay. While rivals scheme and generals prepare for war, the monarch appears frail, whispering that they may not live long. In that frailty, the nobles hold back their ambition, unwilling to be seen as predators. The monarch, protected by their apparent weakness, continues ruling with more security than any army could provide. Machiavelli observed that the strongest rulers were often those who never raised their voices, who never needed to shout or threaten, because they had perfected the art of appearing too delicate to oppose. The weapon of weakness strikes in two directions at once. It shields the manipulator from accountability, while simultaneously forcing others into service. The weak cannot be challenged without looking cruel, and they cannot be refused without appearing heartless. And so the strong, desperate to protect their image of compassion, obey willingly. You've seen this weapon at work in everyday life. The co-worker who never completes assignments, yet always has an excuse rooted in fragility. The stress was too much, the task too heavy, the world too unkind. Colleagues step in to cover their responsibilities, not because they admire them, but because they fear being seen as cold. The friend who always has a crisis and never a solution. The partner who makes you feel as though your independence wounds them. The relative who convinces you that saying no to them is the same as betrayal. These are not random accidents. They are the sharpened edges of a law that Machiavelli understood long before modern psychology gave it names. Weakness becomes a weapon the moment it stops being a state of being and becomes a strategy for survival. The moment fragility is used not just to gain protection, but to command obedience. And unlike swords or shields, this weapon leaves no scars. It leaves you drained, guilty, and bound, while the one wielding it remains untouchable. What makes this weapon so devastating is its invisibility. When someone uses anger or force, you can see it clearly and resist. But when they use weakness, you struggle to even name what is happening. You tell yourself that you are being kind, that you are being noble, that you are doing the right thing. Yet each act of kindness leaves you emptier while they grow stronger. Machiavelli observed this paradox in courts where nobles who were feared often fell quickly, but those who played frail endured for decades. Power dressed as power invites rebellion. Power dressed as weakness escapes suspicion. The longer you serve it, the more you begin to doubt your own perception. You start asking, am I cruel for wanting freedom? Am I selfish for saying no? Am I heartless for protecting my energy? These doubts are not accidents. They are the effects of the weapon itself. Weakness manipulates you into questioning your own morality until obedience feels like virtue and resistance feels like sin. And here lies Machiavelli's chilling insight. When weakness becomes a weapon, it no longer seeks protection. It seeks control. The frail are not asking for your shield. They are demanding your surrender. And the longer you confuse their weakness for innocence, the deeper their chains will cut. If weakness is the disguise and helplessness is the mask, then guilt is the chain that locks you in place. Machiavelli understood that the most effective rulers did not need to threaten or punish. They only needed to make their subjects feel guilty for even considering disobedience. Guilt is a weapon sharper than any blade because it turns the victim into their own jailer. You do not need guards if the prisoner polices themselves. And that is exactly what guilt does. It convinces you that protecting yourself is betrayal, that saying no is cruelty, that setting boundaries is heartless. Once you accept this logic, you no longer need an oppressor. You become your own oppressor, repeating the script in your mind until your will is broken. History offers countless examples. A royal mother, fragile in appearance, weeping before her court, pleading that she only wished for her children's safety. The nobles, terrified of appearing heartless toward a grieving woman, bent to her will. Her tears guided policy. Her sorrow dictated wars. Her weakness became a throne of invisible power. Machiavelli observed that this was not a rare exception, but a recurring pattern. People are easier to rule through guilt than through fear, because fear inspires rebellion, while guilt convinces people that rebellion itself is wrong. Think of the times in your own life when you have said yes, not because you wanted to, but because you feared how someone might react if you refused. That was not generosity. That was guilt holding the leash. The manipulator does not need to shout. They only need to sigh. They do not need to threaten. They only need to remind you of how much they suffer. And in that reminder, you hand over your freedom, believing that you are being noble. This is the cruelest part of guilt. It convinces you that your obedience is moral, even holy, when in reality, it is just control wearing a mask. Guilt thrives because it preys on your conscience. It whispers that good people never abandon the suffering, that kindness means giving endlessly, that love means sacrifice without end. But here is the truth Machiavelli forced us to confront. Endless giving is not kindness. It is slavery. Endless sacrifice is not love. It is surrender. The trap of guilt turns compassion into a weapon. And once you are caught, it becomes almost impossible to see where your duty ends and where your chains begin. The reason guilt is so effective is because it does not come from outside. It grows inside you. Once planted, it multiplies. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you were too harsh. You question your boundaries, telling yourself that you should have given more. You imagine others speaking about you as cold, selfish, or unkind. All of this takes place without a single word from the manipulator. They no longer need to pressure you because guilt does the work for them. Machiavelli recognized this as the ultimate form of power, the ability to make others serve you willingly while believing they are serving virtue itself. To escape this trap, you must learn to separate compassion from control. True compassion does not demand your exhaustion. True kindness does not require endless sacrifice. And true love is not measured by how much of yourself you can give away. The moment you understand this, the weapon of guilt begins to lose its edge. The moment you refuse to mistake obedience for morality, you begin to step out of the trap and reclaim the strength that was always yours. Power is rarely where it appears to be. The generals march in the open. The rulers sit on thrones. But Machiavelli warned that real power often moves in silence. The silent empire is built not by the loud or the strong, but by those who appear fragile, those who seem incapable of ruling, yet who command through quiet manipulation. Unlike armies that storm the gates, the silent empire spreads invisibly, controlling hearts and minds before anyone realizes they are conquered. Machiavelli saw this in Florence, where the most dangerous figures were not always the warriors, but the ones who played powerless. They would whisper their sorrows, display their wounds, and present themselves as too broken to be opposed. And while the strong looked down on them as weak, these so-called weak were already weaving webs of loyalty and guilt that bound entire factions. A ruler who shouts his commands may face rebellion, but a figure who suffers in silence gains obedience without protest. People do not rebel against the suffering. They rally to protect it. That is why the silent empire expands while others crumble. It thrives because it does not look like domination. It looks like compassion. It looks like duty. It looks like noble service. Imagine a religious figure who appears humble, clothed in simplicity, who claims no ambition and no desire for control. Outwardly, they reject power, but inwardly, their silence demands devotion. Followers feel guilty ignoring them, ashamed to challenge them, and soon entire communities shape their lives around the quiet authority of one who never openly asked for power. This is the genius of the silent empire. It grows without resistance because no one dares to call it an empire. In the modern world, you can see it in offices where the least assertive employee somehow dictates the entire team. You can see it in families where the most fragile member commands every decision. You can see it in relationships where one partner controls not by shouting, but by sighing, by withdrawing, by making every act of independence feel like betrayal. The silent empire teaches us that control does not require aggression. It only requires the ability to make others fear looking cruel. And when that fear takes root, People hand over their freedom without realizing that they are becoming subjects in a kingdom built on fragility. Machiavelli's warning was simple but chilling. The loud tyrant may fall to rebellion, but the quiet manipulator builds a reign that no sword can cut. The silent empire is dangerous because it feels righteous to serve. You convince yourself that you are noble for sacrificing, that you are moral for yielding, that you are compassionate for obeying. In truth, you are building walls around yourself, brick by brick, until your life belongs more to them than to you. The most unsettling part is that these empires often go unnoticed until it is too late. Families are reorganized around one fragile figure. Workplaces bend to one seemingly overwhelmed employee. Entire communities follow the unspoken commands of someone who claims to carry no authority. And because it looks like kindness, few ever resist. But Machiavelli insisted that to survive, you must see through appearances. Weakness that becomes a throne is no longer weakness. It is rule. And if you mistake it for innocence, you will live your life as a servant without ever knowing you were conquered. The silent empire does not shout its presence, but once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it. The question then is simple. How do you detect it before it consumes you? The most dangerous weapons are the ones you never notice. Machiavelli's dark law thrives because most people cannot see it until their energy is already drained and their freedom already gone. The illusion of weakness, the mask of helplessness, the silent empire, all of these strategies depend on one thing: your blindness. If you cannot recognize the law, you cannot defend yourself against it. The first sign is simple but easy to ignore. You feel exhausted after helping someone, yet you cannot explain why. A conversation with them feels like work. Time spent with them leaves you heavier, not lighter. Your body senses the drain before your mind does. This is not compassion. It is extraction. The second sign is fear. You notice that you hesitate to say no, not because the request is reasonable, but because you are afraid of how they will react. You fear being judged as cold or unkind, so you surrender your freedom to protect your image. This is not kindness. It is obedience dressed as morality. The third sign is repetition. You realize that the same person always seems to need saving, that their crises never end, that your role is always rescuer, and theirs always victim. True weakness seeks recovery, but manipulative weakness seeks permanence. If someone never grows from your help, but only deepens their dependence, you are not helping them. You are feeding their control. Another sign is the imbalance of responsibility. When you share your struggles, they dismiss or minimize them. But when they suffer, you are expected to respond immediately and completely. Their pain is always larger, their needs always heavier, their story always louder. You begin to notice that there is no reciprocity, only consumption. Perhaps the most subtle sign is how you feel about yourself after the interaction. Genuine connection leaves you with dignity and energy. Manipulative weakness leaves you doubting yourself, second-guessing your choices, and even questioning your morality. This is the most dangerous effect of the dark law. It makes you believe that your boundaries are cruelty and your exhaustion is selfishness. Once that belief takes hold, you are no longer a free person. You are a servant disguised as a friend. Machiavelli warned that the greatest danger lies not in the obvious tyrant, but in the subtle manipulator who convinces you that surrender is virtue. To defend yourself, you must sharpen your perception. Ask, do I feel lighter or heavier after spending time with this person? Do I give out of choice or out of fear? Do they ever stand on their own? Or do they remain endlessly dependent on my strength? These questions cut through the illusion and reveal the truth. The weak who use this law are not always malicious, but they are always consuming. The difference between genuine weakness and manipulative weakness is growth. A truly weak person seeks healing, seeks recovery, seeks to stand again. A manipulative weak person seeks only to remain fragile so they can bind others. Recognizing this distinction is the first act of freedom. For once you see the law in action, it can no longer control you. Awareness is the shield Machiavelli offers. Without it, you live as prey. With it, you begin to reclaim the throne of your own life. Breaking free from the control of weakness is one of the hardest battles you will ever face, because the prison is built inside your own conscience. Machiavelli knew that once guilt and obligation sink their hooks into you, no chains or guards are necessary. You begin to police yourself. The key to freedom, then, is not cruelty, but clarity. The first step is recognition. You must allow yourself to see manipulation where you once saw innocence. This does not mean denying compassion, but it does mean refusing to confuse compassion with servitude. Ask yourself, is this person seeking to heal, or are they seeking to remain fragile, so I will keep carrying them? The answer will tell you if your kindness is being honored or exploited. The second step is refusal to play the rescuer. Every manipulative weak person depends on the same script. They play the victim, and you play the savior. The only way to break the cycle is to step out of the role entirely. When you stop rescuing, they're forced to face themselves, and the power dynamic begins to collapse. At first, they will resist. They will weep louder, complain more, escalate their crises. Machiavelli warned that manipulators fight hardest when their supply of strength is being cut off. This moment feels cruel, but it is actually the beginning of liberation. The third step is the creation of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors. They allow in what nourishes and shut out what depletes. To set boundaries is to declare that your energy, your time, and your love are sacred resources, not infinite wells to be drained. When someone attempts to pull you back into the cycle of guilt, the boundary reminds you that protecting your life is not selfish. It is survival. Finally, freedom requires a shift in perspective. Machiavelli taught that strength is not about domination. It is about discernment. True strength is the ability to say no when saying yes would destroy you. It is the wisdom to see the difference between helping someone rise and allowing them to feed on you. When you embody this strength, you stop being prey. You stop confusing obedience with love, and you begin to live as someone sovereign over their own life. The path of breaking free is not smooth. The moment you withdraw from manipulation, the weak who wield control will test every tactic they know. They will accuse you of betrayal. They will claim you have grown old. They may even attempt to rally others to see you as cruel. Machiavelli described this as the desperate grasp of a ruler losing their throne. The moment when the mask of weakness slips and the hunger for control is exposed. Do not mistake this escalation as proof that you are wrong. It is proof that your boundaries are working. When the guilt no longer binds you, when the sighs no longer sway you, when the helplessness no longer dictates your choices, you are no longer their servant. And something remarkable happens in this space of freedom. Your energy begins to return. What once drained you now flows back into your own growth. The strength you spent rescuing others can be invested in your own vision, your own healing, your own future. And here lies Machiavelli's final gift: understanding that freedom from false weakness is not cruelty, but justice. You were never created to live as prey. You were meant to become sovereign, a ruler of your own choices, untouchable by the manipulations of those who thrive on fragility. Every boundary you hold, every no you speak, is a declaration that your life belongs to you. The moment you break free from the control of weakness, something profound happens. You step into what Machiavelli would have called sovereignty, the state of ruling your own life instead of being ruled by guilt, pity, or false fragility. This is the birth of the awakened sovereign, a person who is no longer deceived by masks of helplessness and no longer chained by the trap of guilt. To live as a sovereign is not to harden your heart or reject compassion. It is to hold compassion with discernment. It is to see when kindness uplifts and when kindness enslaves. It is to recognize that true love does not demand endless sacrifice, and true morality does not require the death of your spirit. The awakened sovereign is dangerous to systems built on unconscious control because they cannot be manipulated. When a weak manipulator cries louder, the sovereign does not bend. When guilt is used as a chain, the sovereign breaks it. When helplessness is weaponized, the sovereign sees through the disguise. And in that clarity, every relationship begins to change. Some will fall away. Those who depended on your obedience will accuse you of being cruel. They will say you have changed, that you are not the same. But Machiavelli would remind you, this is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of growth. Weak rulers always resist when their subjects awaken. Yet those who remain, the ones who respect your strength, will rise with you. They will not fear your boundaries. They will honor them. They will not demand endless sacrifice. They will give as much as they take. These are the relationships of equals, the bonds of free people. And once you taste this kind of freedom, you will never again accept chains disguised as kindness. The awakened sovereign does not just live differently. They inspire others. By refusing to play the role of rescuer, you show others that they too can step out of manipulation. By holding your energy sacred, you teach others that their energy is sacred as well. This is why Machiavelli considered sovereignty the highest form of strength, not because it dominates, but because it liberates. The awakened sovereign understands a truth that most people never dare to face. Not everyone can come with you. Some connections exist only as long as you remain small, fragile, or endlessly available. When you rise, those bonds break. It feels like loss, but it is liberation. You are not meant to be chained to people who fear your strength. You are meant to stand with those who celebrate it. Machiavelli taught that the strongest rulers are not those who control others, but those who cannot be controlled themselves. This is your task now, not to harden into cruelty, not to withdraw into coldness, but to embody strength with clarity. You do not need to attack. You only need to refuse to be consumed. And when you live this way, the world changes around you. Weakness can no longer disguise itself as innocence. Guilt can no longer enslave you. Helplessness can no longer command you. You have become sovereign, and sovereignty is the ultimate shield. Machiavelli revealed a law that few dare to see, that weakness, when disguised, can become the deadliest form of control. Once you recognize this truth, you can never go back to living blindly. But here is where the story takes an even darker turn. What happens when it isn't another person who controls you, but your own pursuit of happiness? Centuries after Machiavelli, Marcus Aurelius uncovered a trap that still captures millions today. He warned that the very act of chasing joy, the desperate hunger to feel good, to be happy, to stay positive, creates misery instead of peace. It is a prison as invisible as Machiavelli's chains, but far more personal because it is built inside your own mind. In my next video, Marcus Aurelius, The Happiness Trap. Why the pursuit of joy makes us miserable